kind of messed with it a little bit. So can we grab that?
Now I'm
And then we have this special box over here that I think is what we've been using now. So can I grab this? I don't want to like cause any issues pulling it out there. Now let's try this.
I have those better losses, but you have the lost one. I have the lost one. But I have them from the beginning already. I don't know why. It's going to be next slide.
Yeah. I called Paige in. She's a lot more advanced with the Echo stuff than I am, so we're gonna figure that out for sure.
Are you not chair?
No, no one's listed as chair.
We have a yellow one.
You can move the slides.
It is working.
Yeah, I can move the slide.
Yeah, let's move
Okay, hello. So we're at the top of the hour here. So is Shane hanging around somewhere? He was here a second ago. Closer. Wow. I have to almost eat the microphone here. So at the top of the hour here, you ended up in the routing area open meeting. Welcome everybody. I hope that was your intention. If it is not, it's not too late to leave the room as such. So there are like a few technical, complications here with driving the slides. So we're going to see if we can, bring it home anyway in a good way. So this is the note well here. So the main thing is about IPR and about being polite and no harassment as such. So I'm going to leave it actually on the screen for for like 10 20 minutes 10 20 seconds should be good enough. Give it a read, and then we're gonna move forward with the session. That is the assumption. Then we can read English. That's okay. You're forgiven. You're forgiven. Okay, so because this is a Meet Echo thing here, so we actually have some procedures, and the session actually is being recorded. So please be aware of that one. I'm pretty sure you all know how Meet Echo works. I know at this point in time already. So we also have some resources available. So this comes from the default slide deck, as such, on how to get the agenda, how to prepare, and what are the issues, in case you have technical difficulties. So going more about the content for the next 60 minutes here. So we have a reasonably short agenda with a few topics that will impact probably, all of the routing, all of your working groups here as such. The first 10 minutes, we're gonna, check if, the agenda what we have here is sufficient for everybody. If things need to be added or removed, or if somebody else actually has some other complaints, please do speak up. We will appreciate help for the scribing. So the scribing is very easy nowadays. We have the note tool, so like many people in the room, if you are really bored with listening to us, you can actually open up that thing and enjoy yourself to the full by making minutes and notes. So that is very appreciated. Okay, so what is happening here? It's not me.
I'm not moving.
Okay, thank you. So the agenda, what we have here, the first main topic is going to be about operational considerations, what is being investigated for being, like a new section in all of the in all of the documents coming out of the routing area itself. So this is right now still in draft phase. I think it is going through. Huh?
It's going through working group adoption.
So it's going through working group adoption as such. So I think your feedback and your response is going to be very important for this one, just to see how well and how good we can actually make these operational considerations, because most of the time these things pop up completely at the end of the cycle of the document, and then suddenly it's like, okay, you have a wonderful technology, but how to actually use it in an operational environment. It's a complaint we get often, and it should not be an afterthought. It should be something we consider from the creation of the document itself. So Adrian is going to be the speaker about this topic at this point in time. And then at the end, we're gonna introduce or say a little bit more about the routing open source initiative itself, which was started up about 10 years ago. So the intent there is to have more like an open discussion and to understand, what exactly is expected there, and how we can actually make this thing work, properly, and what are the requirements to make it work, from an ISG perspective. Then we're gonna end up with 5 minutes, any other business. Any other things before we jump to the first agenda item? No? Okay.
Okay, so this is, hi. So this is just sharing of an experiment that we are considering. The BGP related work is happening in a lot of working groups in the routing area, but also in the ops area. And there are certain parts of the specification that touch upon the core BGP, what I'm calling the core BGP protocol. And since the work happens in different working groups, it has been seen that some of these issues are not highlighted or brought up early in the document, processing in the working group, and they tend to get highlighted or brought to attention much later in the cycle. So this is something that we are going to try about a year, little more than a year, to see if we can have a team of BGP experienced BGP implementers and operators who would kind of be part of this directorate and review and provide timely comments to raise the quality of the specifications, and get feedback to the authors early in the document phase. So any thoughts or any feedback is most welcome. Adrian?
Hi, Adrian Farrell. Just because you're not going to hear enough of me in this meeting anyway. Are you going to be, or is this directorate going to proactively chase BGP drafts, or is it going to be like other directorates, only and sort of on demand from chairs or authors?
We are open to feedback. We could do it by the chairs requesting, or it could be in any other way. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know.
So my concern would be that if you're not careful, these valuable reviews will be done too late in the process.
Yes, and that's, as I mentioned, that's not the purpose. So, yeah, I think we can look at doing how to do this earlier in the process. So there are some, yeah, I would share something offline.
My aim is to use every microphone in the room.
The clicker doesn't work. So you just
Okay, and the clicker doesn't work. Right, so this piece of work is revising RFC 5706, which has been around for rather a long time. And it is guidelines for considering operations and management in IETF specifications, which I hope is generally accepted to be a good idea, but the devil is in how we implement that good idea. This draft is being presented in the Ops Area open meeting and in the Ops Area working group, where there's currently an adoption poll. So there's more discussion of the detail of the content of the draft in those presentations. And what I'm trying to do here is give some context for the routing area and what we might want to look at as we go forward. As you'll see, there's 2, 4, 6 named authors of this work, and as a team we've been meeting a lot to push this forward, but contributions are not limited to those 6 people. This has got to be a wide community effort. Next slide. Make sort of click noises. Click, there we go, good, thank you. So, the assumption is that we want the protocols that we design and specify to be successfully deployed, and key to that is making them easy to operate and manage. I think that's underlying everything right back 5706, almost before some of you were born, I think. That was Dave Harrington who led that. It's been a good anchor for the discussion, but over 15 years, it's become decidedly stale, if only to remove things like SNMP from the document. It needed cleaning up, but at the same time, there's a lot of lessons we've learned along the way. And one of the things is that we need to work out what audience we're targeting with this work. Because quite often the people that design the protocols have a very different perspective from those who are reviewing the documents. So one of the things we set out to do early was try to scope the document much better, and then offload the things that didn't belong to other places. So, for example, the Ops Directorate has a list of things to think about when you're reviewing a document, and that's been moved out into the Ops Directorate wiki, so that this document becomes guidance for the authors of drafts, not guidance for reviewers, not instructions for area directors or anything like that. We also sort of struggled with 5706, that a lot of the guidance was muddied by the need to understand the technology, both the protocol that was in the spec, but also all the different operations and management technologies. So we tried to structure this work with a focus on clarity of the guidance and identifying the key things that authors need to think about, mainly then giving sort of an overview guidance and perhaps pointers to places to get more detail. So it's been a challenge to get the right balance between providing that guidance and not being rigid about you must cover this topic in this way. We're aware that the reviewers are adding a lot of value, but quite often the reviews come really late in the process. And I think the experience teaches us that if you can get your basic manageability operational considerations in your head at the time you're designing a protocol, you end up with something that is much better than if you come to it late and try to retrofit it. Click. That's quite good. So this is just the front page, and the whole point of it is that highlighted bit in blue at the bottom. So this document also introduces a requirement to include operational considerations section in new RFCs in the IETF stream. Let's think about that a little bit. If you were writing a document for publication in the IETF stream, in other words, out of any working group or AD sponsored, you would be required to include a security consideration section. That has been a requirement for so long that I don't think anybody is shocked by it. They may be puzzled as to what they put in the section, but they go, yeah, you know, we all understand security is important, we should do something. And what this is saying is exactly that for operational considerations. Getting some thought about the operational requirements of any document related to an IETF protocol, so that's even informational, BCPs, anything in the IETF stream, needs to think about the operational considerations. It may be that having thought about it, you say, well, you know what, this is a BCP for how to write an RFC that describes the appeals process. We probably don't need anything, but we thought about it. On the other hand, being forced to think about, I'm inventing a new routing protocol for AI agents to communicate, that's going to need some thought about how it's operated and managed. Click. So from a routing area perspective, we need to think about some things that might worry us. It could be that this draft appears to provide instructions to reviewers, and a reviewer will come along and say, well, you didn't check all of these boxes, so I reject this document. It's not that. It is guidance for authors on what to think about. And the guidance for the operations directorate is moved out to their wiki. What that means is you should not be getting reviews that come along and say, well, you included the operational consideration section, but you did not do this, and therefore it's a fail. You might get something that said, you didn't demonstrate that you thought about this. That's a different thing. It's really annoying. Could somebody just turn off the mics on the floor, just in case it's that?
Turn this off? I don't think there's a way to turn it off.
Right, pushing on. This does not force checkbox documentation on authors, other than include the operational considerations section. it's not a long list. So those with memories will know that the PCE working group had an RFC, well, it was a draft and then it became a historic RFC on manageability consideration section. And that really tried to lead the authors a little bit by the nose, saying you need to include these 10 subsections and each to cover each of these different things. And I think at the time that helped the authors understand what sort of things they needed to think about. But it was also very checkboxy, and it led to lots of kind of vacuous subsections saying this document does not require any of this thing. I don't know, Drew may want to comment on later experience on that. But anyway, that work predated 5706 and was kind of abandoned at the time. Authors do need, however, to be encouraged to think about operational considerations. And so there's a need to suggest to authors who frankly, they may be routing protocol specialists, not operational specialists. So they need a little bit of a poke to say, this is something that you should think about. So what we're trying to do is guide the authors what they should think about to make their document better so that they get a better experience in the whole RFC publication process, and ultimately their protocol becomes a great success and they are introduced into the Internet Hall of Fame because of what they did. And a third thing to really worry about is small protocol extensions getting held up with larger discussions. And that's sufficiently big that it's got a whole slide of its own. Click. Right. So the two things to think about, suppose you're adding a little bit to an existing protocol, okay, some big established, well-known protocol, and you're just putting a little extra TLV or something in. And suppose that that original protocol does not have operational considerations and is maybe very deficient, missing chunks of OAM and all sorts. What I would say is, and I've used BCP 14 language here just to highlight it, ADs must not block the new work waiting for updates to the old work. So the base protocol is deficient. The extension should not be held up waiting for OAM operational considerations on the base protocol. However, I would say this is not a process ID and we cannot control the IESG through this document. I would suggest we cannot control the IESG period, but non-com is taking feedback. Number two, the protocol extension must be as manageable as possible. So within the constraints of whatever the base protocol has got, you're adding a little widget, make it possible to manage and operate that widget within those constraints. Recognize what is wrong with the base protocol. If it's totally deficient, say so. Hey, I'm doing this new widget. This is the best I can do because the base protocol spec is SH1T. Point it out, that gives working groups and other people the chance to actually pick up and run with the need, but it doesn't hold back your protocol extension. So it may be good to go on and develop separate work to do the operational requirements and then the new protocol for operations for that old piece of work. But that is not gating on you pushing through your protocol extension. Click. So where are we with this? The original plan, and this has been substantially driven by Med, who is sitting there, so you can kick him later, was that this would be an AD-sponsored BCP, that we would last call it across all of the operations working groups September this year, last call across the IETF October this year. Clearly, we didn't achieve that. It turned out to be a lot more work than we had thought. We thought we were just opening 5706 and tidying it. Turns out we were significantly rewriting. The authors have been meeting weekly. They have not been sitting on their thumbs. Lots of new revisions, lots of issues tracked in a GitHub, which you can happily go and look at. Alvaro has been very helpful. He's taken on being document shepherd very early in the process, and he's been proactive. And we've actually had a lot of useful reviews. We've been chasing people across all of the areas to get input. We would love to have more reviews from the routing area. We're in the middle of a poll in the operations area. Can you still hear me? Because the audio's right. It's very strange when that happens. We're in the middle of an adoption poll into the ops area working group. So that's actually going to give it more focus and review than the original plan was. Please feel free to join in with that adoption poll. Because the two chairs of that working group are because the two chairs of that working group are authors on the draft, Alvaro is actually running that adoption call. Click. Okay, open issues are in GitHub. Go and look at GitHub if you're interested in that, and click. So, yeah, call for adoption, feedback on the ops area working group list, contributions and issues and comments. You can do that through GitHub if you want. I have a personal preference to see stuff on the mailing list, and then the authors will copy it into GitHub, or you can raise it in GitHub and copy it to the mailing list or whatever. But I do like stuff being on the list so we can see. We've started to see some people actually putting operational consideration sections in their drafts, for which thank you. What I would love to see is some volunteers to alpha test our document to see if they read it and they sort of pay attention to it, would that give them sufficient clear guidance and help in adding to their draft? Because that way we can work out what we actually need to do. Click. I say click because I think that's the end of the slides. So at this point, you can all shout at the other 5 authors. I think Turles is first.
You may have to switch on the microphone.
Turles Eckert. Yeah, thanks a lot for that work. I really love the idea of, especially for routing, to have more, focus being put on this. On the other hand, when I started to review the document, there were thousands of details coming up, and then I had to drop the ball because there were these stupid stuff I had to write myself. So I'll get back to that. Maybe some high level, your really nasty thoughts. We have a lot of routing and int protocol working groups that have respective ops working group. Are you trying to get the ops working group out of business by doing all the ops work, right? So obviously, tongue in cheek, but there is the underlying question of which considerations are better in their own draft, and especially when they have an own working group, right? So I think that needs to simply be in the text, right? I also don't believe that if you have a specification that all the operational considerations, kind of reviewing the references you had, would best go in a separate section, like, oh, this is the small cage for the operational stuff, right? I think there are a lot of things that even can be normative, right? When it comes to configuration parameters to make the timing, the performance, and other characteristics like diagnostics of the protocol work, right? I don't want to have them capsuled away, right? They may need to go into the pseudocode, right? So here's the pseudocode of the protocol. Here is the timer for the diagnostic so that you can actually operate the bloody thing, right? So there are a lot of places, I think, through the document where these considerations would best go. I think that is a major part. And then I think examples for all the aspects that, you know, people need to understand better, right? Packet format, topologies, base configuration, those type of things, right? So those were a couple of the high level things I was
So
thinking.
do you mean abstract examples as the list you just gave, or concrete examples, pointers to drafts that do it right?
Yes.
Yes, good.
David Lamparter for routing. Between writing the protocol specification and the operator actually operating it, there is still the implementer left. And personally speaking, I have looked at some specifications. I understand what they do, but I have no idea how they are used. Is this in scope for this?
Oh, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And if you happen to notice as you read the document, which you'll be doing obviously tonight, if you happen to notice that it's not clearly enough called out that it's in scope, please shout.
John?
John Scudder. So when you said, oh, I'd like people to alpha test this thing, I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should be a good citizen. I popped it open, saw the page count, and closed it. So maybe I'll open it again. I want to point you at the example of RFC 8126, which has possibly the most useful overview section of any RFC I've ever used. It has a checklist up front, I think section 1.3. I don't know if your draft is amenable to having that same kind of cheat sheet section, but if it did, I think it would be super useful. Although as a footnote to that, I will also say very sadly that when I was still sitting over at that desk, I had to process a whole lot of RFCs where people had clearly written the IANA consideration section without even referring to the one-page checklist. So I don't know, I don't have an answer to this, but a one-page checklist would at least be better than no one-page checklist.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on that side of the fence. I think there is a tension with people who see that checklist and think that is like a pointy head boss checklist, that you've got to tick all these boxes before your document can proceed. And we have to find a way where this is still, have you thought about, not have you documented? Kiriti.
So I like pointy head checklists. It makes people do things. So can you make this a mandatory field in the markdown thingy? Because that's all I use. And so, yeah, I can see Jeff is shaking his head, but if it's not there, I'm not going to put anything in.
So to the extent that the operational considerations section, I think, pops up as a, I don't know if it's mandatory, but it pops up as a piece of markdown so that there's a section for you to fill in. I think that were this to become an RFC, then the markdown would follow. But now, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so the reason I say this is that I would never have filled in a securities consideration section, but when it's there and I have to fill it in, then I do think about it. Until then, I don't. And
Right.
so I'm applying the same logic here.
So I disagree with Creedy in the sense of, since I live at the other end of the vending machine that his bit of the organization occasionally imposes on developers, I'm not very fond of what the side effect of this is in terms of readability for documents. And this is conversation Adrian and I have had a little bit on the side as well. What I do support for Creedy, though, is that we were looking to make this one part mandatory, but mostly we're trying to make this something that is easy to use to let people get better documents out of this. And an example of this is if you had a vending machine of some sort tied to the author's IETF website that says, I need to do an operational considerations. You poke it and you get this giant list of, do these things apply to your document? And it says, okay, if these apply, here are review criteria you should have. And maybe it also spits out, if you have to talk about this type of consideration, maybe here's some boilerplate style text you can start with. Now, this is not a mandatory to include thing, but just like all the other directorate and other reviews we get from people, if you're asking somebody to create a style of answer to these things, you want to use the words that these people want to see. And this is a way to start the conversation without having to make this stuff up and have 4 or 5 iterations of what should this look like. I'm not saying this is what we actually generate in terms of output from the group, but it provides an example of here's an outcome that might be beneficial.
So I think that's an empty queue. So adoption into the Ops Area Working Group is the start, not the end of the process. Since if this becomes an RFC, it may have serious implications for what you have to put in the drafts that you're all working on. Please contribute to the review process and ideally suggest text.
Okay, so this brings us to the last part of the session here. And this is to, so the objective of the rest of the time is mostly to have an open discussion here, like an open mic on the Routing Open Source Initiative. So this is something that popped up on the radar of the ADs sitting here quite recently because everything was working well until it didn't. And then suddenly it popped up, and and for me actually it was like quite a new thing. So I'm not really sure how many people actually were aware that this thing actually was happening. So the idea is of this particular slot to give like a very short, I'm gonna try to make it short at least, quick contest setting here on what it is and what your initial objective actually was, and then actually have more like an open mic on how to progress this forward and how we ADs can actually help, this thing to move forward as such, and try to make things happen here. So this particular, initiative was started like, I think almost like about 10 years ago. And initially, like, I think Alia was the original AD setting this thing up, and she actually saw the interest of this for the IETF community. And from that moment onwards, I think there was like an informal planning of like at each IETF have like a lunchtime where people sort of like came together, talked about open source initiatives on routing and and different aspects on how to implement things, because some working groups they require to have like 2 interoperable implementations. So this thing actually helped with making the contacts in the right way. So the slides, what I put here, by the way, it's like a more like a high level kind of overview. I'm not going to talk about all of them because it probably drives us a little bit too far, into this particular, thing. because I want to have more like an open discussion here. So like I said, like, the concept began like just after like IETF 97, so it's quite a while ago. The intent was, that it would be like informal, non-working group itself. It's community-driven meetings. And also, and Ali actually emphasized at that point in time that the success actually of this thing depends really upon the community itself, and not upon, the ADs kind of like sponsoring this. So it's really, a community-driven initiative. And after that, Lou and Alistair, they sort of like picked up, the responsibility here, and they drove this thing forward until, quite recently when, a few things stumbled over, and that's why, we're sitting here. So trying to fix things. So already discussed, this is like more like a free form kind of a thing. Yeah, so I think later on, hopefully people will explain a bit more what it is, during these meetings, and what your community achievements actually are, at least from what I understood. So this information, what you see on the screen, it came from, from information which was shared with us, by, some of the proponents of this particular, these initiatives. Yeah, so this brings us, to the current situation and some of the concerns. So the main thing, what sort of like, caused some little bit of frustration here, to say it, like that, is that there was like a meeting room available for the, for the initiative, and suddenly it wasn't anymore. And there were questions about like, okay, why ISG, why you took away, this room from us. And also, it is a little bit, unclear what are the actual, objectives from an open source engagement within the IETF itself. The question was raised to the, to the ISG also, and that's going to be part of the discussion here, as such. You want to say something about, the room thing and why we have? So the intent here is, to get like a reconnect, of what this actually is happening here. Now, before maybe we go to the next slide, can we just have like a show of hands in the room to see who was aware of this open source routing initiative? Well, it's like, yeah, quite a lot. It's, it's a lot. It's very good. So yeah, so the idea is actually to get like, like a better clarification, on the room allocations potentially. So we can actually, try to request for those. We also need to reflect a little bit back. I think, the world changed in the last 10 years. So what was 10 years ago is maybe not overly relevant now anymore. Some other things actually happened, more open source, things are happening also at the IETF. So the Sonic engagement is like another one of them. I think they're also meeting during this IETF meeting here to do like some sort of a workshop or a session or something like that. And what we, Routing IDs would like to get out of this session is, your feedback on, why you find this, interesting. What are the key takeaways here, and how we can actually make this thing more successful. So at least from the current understanding is, the basic request is to have a meeting room periodically, hopefully at the same point in time, every single IETF meeting. Okay, so now it's more like, open feedback, open mic time. So please, if the original people, yeah, give me some.
Yeah, so before Torles, Aliyah is here with us in this meeting. So if you don't mind, Torles, would like to hear from her.
Sure. Let's see. Hi, Aliyah Atlas. So when we started the Routing Open Source meeting, this was when we were first trying to get the hackathon going. And it goes back to the roots of the IETF. What we're here for is not to write docs. What we're here for is to have implementations of standards that run the internet. And that is one of the things that having the open source community here facilitates, because they are the ones who can go and write quick implementations. We can take the code, you build on top of it. That is really key. We had a real problem, and I haven't heard that it's gone away, where we have a lot of docs and they don't have a lot of implementations. And so there's a couple things that it solves. We had the hackathon going. A lot of the routing drafts that we have and had at the time are not things that you can just go and hack together in a day or two. They have a huge amount of code and basis. And so I asked the participants in various of the open source routing community, what did they want? What would be useful for them? And dear God, they didn't want a hackathon. They didn't want hoopla. They just wanted a room so they could get together and talk, and we could get implementations. And so that's why we did this. And I spent the next, while I was AD, every routing area meeting, we would advertise, don't forget this is happening. So that's really the heart of it, is we want to pull people who are implementing the standards here so they can express what the problems are. By having an open source routing area meeting here, people who are participating in it come here. They can talk to each other. They participate and comment on drafts. Because they're already participating on drafts, others can talk to the people who are doing implementations and find out, does this make sense? How would you implement it? What are the issues you see? And, does it have this applicability? Anyway, that's why we created the mailing list. And the fact that all they really needed was not a hackathon, but a slot that they could all get to without conflicts with other routing meetings. And I guess I will also say that the fact that that meeting is happening is one of the reasons I'm actually able to come back here. I think it's really useful.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alia. Thomas Eckert again. So first of all, my understanding from problems with scheduling were just, related to personal, and from what I heard in the thread that ensued by the fact that the ISG seems to like to reserve lunch slots for privileged communities that are important to listen to. I'm not sure hosts and others, so it would certainly be lovely, to recognize that the open source community should also have the lunch. So I think Gunter made that possible tomorrow. So thank you very much. And I think that's just, one effort within trying to get more, exchange about open source. The mailing list, I think, is separate, right? It shouldn't simply be used for, telling when the next IETF's lunch is, but really about any type of Q&A about open source that are not already known to be specific to another working group or other non-working group effort, right? So please use that mailing list, RTG-open-source, right? I mean, even, when the Sonics folks were presenting their update, I told them, please send that to RTG-open source. That's where the open source people hang out. They didn't do that, right? So, I mean, please don't fragment the stuff, right? So please, if you have something related to open source that you're doing in the IETF, tell it to the RTG-open source mailing list, right? As soon as that mailing list becomes totally overloaded, right? Like from one email per IETF to 100 per quarter, right? So we can think of better structures. But other than that, I think it's a great starting tool to, even discuss what Gunter was asking, what more do we need, right? And I do think we have a couple of, and that's my last point, good established practices with open source and a few working groups that I think are worth to present in a forum like this one or others, so that others can learn about it. Like, for example, using open source reference implementation of new protocols as one way to validate the viability of those new protocol things, right? And maybe I would love to see that for a lot more protocols being done in the IETF, for example, right? So there are a lot of other aspects, right? So that would be good to coordinate and make more knowledgeable to the wider IETF. So thanks.
I'm told not that much. All right, I'm Patrice Brissette. So I'm working on Sonic, and I also initiated the Sonic side meeting for later this week. So people, please join us on the Wednesday doing ads here. But so why so important for us? Well, first of all, it's a very nice way. I think that Alia was mentioning is we are implementing everything that we are doing here, right? It's open source. We are using the FR routing stack for us for the control plane. It's very important that we can also have a voice internally about what is working, what is not working, because obviously whenever we are building Sonic, it's slightly different than having just an us from any company. We are solving kind of slightly different problems, but also from a community point of view. So if we are shutting down here the voice at IETF, I mean, I have a problem with that because I'm using IETF quite a lot because that's what we are implementing right at the end, and it needs to work. The other also thing of line of thought is with universities. We are working a lot with universities. Sonic is great with that, okay? Because it's open source, they are free, we can have student also read the draft, they made the connection, and now if we're closing that, what is the message we're giving to them and say, no, it's not important, what you're gonna do doesn't matter. So I think that aspect of having really an open mind about those community to survive and have a work here at IETF makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of problems to solve. There's a lot of new problems to solve. And I think we have the right set of engineers here to solve them. Now, are those work will translate into draft? I don't know. I don't care, as long as the problem gets solved.
David Lamparter, open source maintainer. I would like to emphasize that this meeting isn't intended to be a meeting of open source routing people meeting each other, which is a little bit what it has devolved to, not entirely, but to some degree. The point of the meeting is, here are the open source people. If you're doing some draft or extending some protocol that is implemented in one of these projects, you can come there and talk to the people, talk about what you're doing, and maybe we can help you implementing a proof of concept. Maybe we can't because we don't have the time, but at least we can give you pointers. And that is really more the goal of this meeting. And I would like to invite everyone in this room to think about it. Do you need this, or do you want this for your draft maybe? Do you want to come to the open source meeting? You don't need to be involved in open source yourself. It's enough if you're doing something that touches on open source routing implementations and have some contact area there.
I yield my time to Chris.
I was just going to say and here's the great thing about the open source community, right? Is that people never agree on everything. So I think David's right about those things, but that's not how I use it, right? So I actually think it's very useful for making connections between the open source groups, which I think you just said it wasn't the point of, right? So I think, there are many good aspects to getting a bunch of people that are doing open source in the same room. One of the things I expressed on the list, which I'll just say out loud here, I think one of the reasons that it's been fairly successful is because it's rather unstructured. A lot of us are really busy, and so, we don't have slides. We're not putting together slide decks. There's no, you don't have to do a lot of prep work to attend the meeting. You just come, and what ends up happening is that you get an organic sort of thing, like people introduce. So the format is that we introduce ourselves. We go round the room. Everyone introduces, maybe says what they're working on, and that often leads to somebody asking a question like, oh, and what about that? What are you doing there? Or how did that work? Or, and so discussions get sparked up, connections get made, and it's been pretty useful, I think, in that sort of destructured, low prep, low cost to attendance.
Lou Berger. I'm really happy I waited until after Chris and after Aaliyah, because they said almost everything that is on my mind relative to this effort. So I'm left with just a couple of things. The first thing is to recognize and thank Aaliyah and the other ADs who through time have approved this meeting, because when we started, you didn't get a room unless you got AD approval. So it took explicit action by the ISG members to foster this. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the current ADs bringing this conversation up, and do ask the ISG, the ADs, maybe the room, what's the right structure to allow this to continue? And to be clear, the only thing that's being asked is that we have a time where we can get together And yeah, we'd like the same time so people know how to schedule around it. They know to show up on Tuesdays at lunchtime. And by the way, it's not Tuesday lunch, it's lunchtime. There's no lunch served. We're not asking for any special treatment other than just a room and a time. And that's it. So we're not asking for much. I think of the word as anarchy is all we need. And specifically, open source is self-organized. We figure it out. We don't need more structure than that for this. We do have structure inside our working groups. We believe in that too, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But this is a good unstructured time to allow us to accomplish whatever we feel like we want to accomplish in that room. Obviously, David and Chris have different opinions on why they're there. That's great. We foster that. From my own experience, we've definitely made connections with other implementers, have identified and resolved mutual issues, even though our projects nominally compete for the same space. Doesn't matter, we help each other out. On one of the projects that I'm involved with, we found out about a critical piece of IETF technology being developed by another open source group, and now it's part of it's fundamental to our project. That would not have happened without these discussions. So I'd love to continue having a forum for such unstructured conversations at a usual time, well-known time, whatever time that may be, so be it. It's nice to be at lunchtime because then we don't conflict with working groups. That's how it started. So thank you again. That's it.
All right, it's me again.
Sorry.
All right, I don't know what's going on with that mic, but okay. All right, so just one thing. I really appreciate what the other format being totally disorganized and figure out what they're going to talk about. But for the Sonic side, we are use case driven. So it's well organized. We are bringing problem statement. So I wish people can just join and like work on those problems with us. It's perhaps a different models, but this is how Sonic community works. So use case, problem statement, and let's do it. So that's, sorry. Just make sure that people understand.
Rüdiger Volk, I have not been hacking for many decades. What I remember from the old times, like 30 and 35 years ago, when we had the interesting times of the protocol wars, running code was the thing that actually was pointing to IETF and internet. And I'm sad to hear that in IETF, resources that actually are obviously contributing to running code are withdrawn. That's really sad. And as I'm not really involved, I don't know how to manage that. Though I remember back in those days, I was telling people, well, okay, the proof that anarchy works is internet and IETF. So loose comment, you know how to do it. I'm completely confident that it's helpful, and yes, resources should actually not be withdrawn there.
Okay, so we have 2 more minutes if anyone wants to say something, otherwise we're going to close. Okay, so thank you, like everybody for this very, very valuable feedback here. That's, it's very clear, that there is like an overwhelming interest, in keep doing this and to keep doing this. So that's, very good to know. I think for the rest, we will need some time to unpack all of the feedback, and that will help us for the next episodes to try to do a better job and making sure we get something. So, but definitely, the overwhelming interest is like a key property here. So, thank you for your feedback. So, thanks. That's it. I was going to say, because it gets to back that. Don't